This podcast contains discussions on sexual misconduct. Topics such as sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment may be discussed. Listener discretion is advised.
There's a lot of global evidence that the most effective group to tackle this topic in terms of providing support to survivors is women's rights organizations. So where we come in is to join hands with them, to try to build equitable relationships with them, to say, how can we support you and also support the goals of your organizations as you do this work?
In this episode, I speak to Lusungu Kalanga and Amanda Bangura, two co-leads working with women's rights organizations to support victims and survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse in Malawi.
If you really want to change the world, and if you really want that one day we should live in a violence-free world, then we need not to fund peace work. We need to fund the revolution. So, and who is carrying the revolution? What is the face of the revolution? It is women's rights organizations.
This is the #NoExcuse podcast, discussing the challenges and complexities and potential solutions in preventing and responding to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment in the aid sector. Through interviews with victims and survivors, experts, aid workers, artists, and leaders. The podcast is produced by the World Health Organization's Department for the Prevention and Response to Sexual Misconduct. I am Guni Dias, your host and global focal point for the department. So usually I'm speaking with one guest, but today we are lucky enough to be joined by not one, but two incredible women making a real impact in Malawi. Welcome Lusungu and Amanda to the #NoExcuse podcast.
Thank you so much, Guni. Pleased to be here.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
You both represent and advocate for survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse while amplifying the voices of women's rights organizations, or WROs. We will dive into some of your work, but first let's start with both of you. How did this duo and co-leadership between you two came about?
Actually, feminist co-leadership is a core principle of feminism because we identify as feminist, and one of the principles is power sharing. So we did look at how heavy this kind of work can be, and we thought it would add so much value to working together as a team than one person having to carry the burden of making all the decisions, but also a lot of things that go on in this sector and in these conversations and the work that we do really involve heavy issues that can lead to vicarious trauma, that can lead to really damaging your personal experiences. So we think that feminist co-leadership has enabled us to be able to continuously challenge each other, challenge assumptions, and make decisions from diverse viewpoints and not just as a person alone. And we feel like we are living out something that is actually very feminist at the core, which is power sharing together. So that's how it started. And yeah, here we are.
How do you complement each other?
The strength is that we have very similar values and very similar approaches to this work and to just lives in general. But we have different experiences and different skill sets, different areas of expertise. So I think when we're in a relationship such as the one Lusu and I share, that is based on a really deep level of trust and love, really, I think it means that there's just the safety between us that if we have different opinions, we can challenge each other. And I think there's a very limited kind of defensiveness or deflection between the two of us, which I think is good for both of us as individuals, but it's also really good for the work as well. A lot of this work is about disrupting status quo, disrupting kind of very normalized abuses and that kind of thing, which is really difficult to stand up against at times. So we kind of can draw on each other in that sense, as well as kind of internally working together to make the best decisions.
Another thing between us that has gone on so well is the learning, the co-learning and unlearning from each other. So coming together, we are able to draw from our strengths and from our experiences, our lived experiences, to come up with this work and do this work together like we do.
You know, obviously we're of different ethnicities, and I'm British, Lusu's Malawian. So I think that we don't shy away from that difference, and we don't shy away from the meaning behind that, but rather we're very aware of what that means in this work, and we leverage it to our advantage, I would say.
Lusungu, I understand that the Malawi program has supported over 1,000 survivors, and from which 8 cases are related to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, which basically are committed by aid workers. Mm-hmm. This is quite a big number. How do you go about supporting these survivors?
This is the point where we show the big importance of equitable relationships, because we cannot claim to work alone. We partner with women's rights organizations, community-based women's rights organizations, and these women's rights organizations are organizations that developed organically in the different communities. They have gained a lot of trust in their communities, and they are doing amazing work despite the fact that they are usually on very shoestring budgets. There's a lot of global evidence that the most effective group to tackle this topic in terms of providing support to survivors is women's rights organizations. So where we come in is to join hands with them, to try to build equitable relationships with them, to say, how can we support you and also support the goals of your organizations as you do this work? So it mostly for this program that we are doing in Malawi, it has been about supporting WROs to build their technical capacity to deliver survivor-centered support to survivors, but also support them financially. And financially does not mean supporting peace work. It means giving them core funding that also supports the larger goals of their organizations. There is this quote that I really like that says, if you really want to change the world, and if you really want that one day we should live in a violence-free world, then we need not to fund peace work. We need to fund the revolution. So, and who is carrying the revolution? What is the face of the revolution? It is women's rights organizations.
Can you give me an example of some of the organizations that you work with, and what has been kind of some success stories working with them and having an impact?
We are working with around 4 women's rights organizations in different districts. We work with organizations such as Kalanga Women Forum, Lilongwe Women Forum, and these are organic organizations that started up as just women coming together as networks, and then became bigger, and then started getting all this trust from communities. We also work with an organization, a women's rights organization that specifically works with women and girls with disabilities called WAG Disabilities. And then we also work in the context of in a humanitarian context. Malawi has a refugee camp called Zalega Refugee Camp, and we supported women leaders in there that were just working independently and voluntarily to come up with to come together and form an organization to support survivors of SIA holistically. So we work with these organizations. There've been a number of success stories in terms of, as you can see, the number of survivors that these WROs have supported. When the risk is high for them, where they are working, and we recognize that they are sitting at the front, they will let us know and say, we are not able to handle this case. We are able to support you in the background, but we want you to be the face of it. And because we have more security, and at times we might have a little more power than the WROs, then we step forward. There are a number of cases cases that we have stepped forward to support directly. But WROs are the first point of call when survivors in the communities experience violence. So for me, I think in terms of stories of success, every time a survivor has been brave enough and gone to these offices for WROs and said, I need support, we feel that that has been a success story. Because in Malawi, as we know, and elsewhere globally, the evidence shows us that survivors a big proportion of survivors do not report. And sometimes it's because of various reasons, but we have not said, because survivors do not report, it's fine. No, our WROs are very proactive in trying to promote the services that they provide in a survivor-centered way. And sometimes you can encounter, we've had a lot of cases that have advanced in different ways. Sometimes a survivor who just needs psychosocial support, we respect that. Sometimes one will need legal redress. Sometimes one will need something else. And we've had cases that we have thought, this is really a case that is going on, and we have provided as much support as we need, and we feel that it's going well. And then we've had a survivor, for example, say, I would like to withdraw. And I would like, I do not need any support anymore. And that is the essence of survivor-centeredness, right? Our job is to ensure and assure survivors that whenever you are ready for support, we'll be there, and not to judge them for their decisions, to let them lead the process. So in terms of success, every time that a survivor has walked through that door and wanted to walk through the process, whatever support that they need, has been success. But also on the side of WROs, in Malawi, the concept of SIA, talking about sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment, has been kind of, right now it's gaining popularity, but it's been like a new concept. And WROs were also not separating different types of violence, but they have managed right now in communities. People are talking about SIA. People are talking about, apparently SIA means aid workers abusing us, and if they do that, now we know where to go to seek for support. And we feel that that is also a lot of success in terms of WROs building that technical capacity and identifying those cases, and communities being able to recognize it as a form of violence as well.
How would you summarize the power that these women rights organizations hold in the community? How would you define that?
So when we talk about the concept of power, as you know, it's very fluid. You can be powerful in one space and not as powerful in another space. So in terms of the power that WROs have, they've got the power of the collective. As you know, there is power in collective action. We feel that is something that WROs are leveraging. And now in different WROs that we work with have been trained to provide accompaniment. Accompaniment meaning that if a survivor says, I would like to go to the police, but I don't want to go alone, because maybe they're intimidated, and sometimes attitudes of different frontline service providers might be kind of re-traumatized survivors. These WROs will go into those spaces and advocate for the survivors' needs. They will hold, since in the justice sector, or in any service provision for survivors, one of the issues, for example, in Malawi, is the attitudes and also lack of resources. So people are not, at times it might be hard for them to do work. But when a WRO member goes with the survivor, they're going there well-trained to advocate for the survivor, well-trained in what kind of delivery of service is expected. So when they go there, it's like, if you do not have internal accountability measures, I will hold you accountable externally, because I know exactly the support that you need to provide to this survivor. So, but we have also managed to work really well with frontline service providers from the government in terms of bringing them together with the WROs and making them assuring them that this is a partnership. We are not forming a parallel structure to say you are doing the wrong thing and we want to do the right thing, but to say how can we come together to provide the best survivor-centered support to survivors. So that we have seen that has worked really well. So WROs in those spaces are really powerful. And I think Amanda can speak more in terms of the accountability arm when we talk about now holding the organizations of the subject of concern accountable for the harm that they have caused, in terms of the power that WROs have there.
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. We've mapped out where the accountability lies for SEEA, what responsibilities should be held theoretically by the donors and by the organizations and by the state or by the international community, and where the gaps are and why those accountability lines are not operating for multiple reasons. So where, let's take a donor, for example, if maybe they just don't have the resource or the people to be in these communities to be a someone that a survivor could report to. They can't literally be there. Maybe there's language barriers. There's multiple barriers that would stop a survivor being able to report directly into a donor. So we've offered what we consider to be an independent reporting channel through the women's rights organization partners to fill that gap. So there's improved accessibility and improved trust for survivors to come forward and report. Likewise with, say, an INGO, they may not be able to put in place in a community a trusted space for survivors to report. They may have put worked with the leaders and put suggestion boxes and put phone numbers and what, but for whatever reason, those are not spaces that women or men feel safe reporting into. So again, having an independent channel to report seems to be bridging that gap somewhat. So we're trying to understand more about how accountability should be operating within the ODA sector, the aid sector, particularly for survivors of SEEA, and how the work with women's rights organizations can fill those gaps so that that process of accountability is just more enabled. One thing that we've started to see is as the aid sector starts to have more standardized approaches, more standardized definitions and accepted practices and processes, that's enabling this work and assisting us even further. So where we might be able to get access to an organization's PCA policy, for example, and we're supporting a survivor on a specific case, we can engage with that organization at the various levels to say, but your policy says this, and this is actually what this survivor has experienced. And, there's a disjuncture here. And what we're finding most of the time is that organizations are going, we didn't know the perspective of the survivor. We hadn't really understood what they were experiencing as kind of part of this process. And actually, we found that organizations have been very forthcoming in wanting to work alongside us, or I suppose even accepting and acknowledging that a survivor has asked us to work with them and advocate on their behalf. And it's actually been positive on both sides of the coin, because we know generally organizations don't want their staff to be abusing vulnerable people, but they may not have, been able to work directly with the survivor or understand the survivor or understand the context of where this abuse has taken place and what that means in his or her life. But because our partners are able to create that closer relationship and that, that trusted bond, and we have that power sharing, equitable relationship with the women's rights organization, it enables us to advocate on their behalf, I suppose, a bit more effectively and say, well, actually, you're not meeting global best practice here, or actually you could do more in this sense. And that's really been beneficial, I think, towards facilitating that accountability process.
And Amanda, from your experience working closely with these victims and survivors of sexual misconduct committed by aid workers, what's it like supporting survivors through this journey?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's I would say it's not easy work, certainly. As Lusu said, where we work in equal partnerships with our women's rights organisation partners, that does mean sometimes working with them to assess on this case who's least at risk to be able to support this survivor, and who can, what advantages do we have that we can leverage to really get justice for this survivor. And sometimes that does mean that Lusu and or I will step in and work with survivors directly. And we're, of course, engaging with the women's rights organisation partners regularly as well. So hearing kind of secondhand, really quite awful stories, quite traumatizing stories, and obviously feeling a lot of empathy for the survivors involved as well. So it's definitely not easy work. There are inherent risks in this work as well. For example, we had one case where Lusungu and some of our other team members, and then members of our women's rights organisation partner, were their lives were threatened and their jobs were threatened. And these, in our organisation, we take any threat seriously. So even if another person might say, "Oh, that seems a bit inconsequential," we always take that very seriously. So we had to jump in onto response mode really quickly. We were really fortunate in that at that time our work was being funded by a bilateral government that has a presence in the country, and so we were able to call the High Commissioner and say, we need additional protective support here. And they acted really quickly as well to kind of leverage their position to offer us and our partners and the survivor reassurance that if anything did kind of escalate, then they would step in and support us. So security is definitely an issue. Our kind of mental health and our well-being is also something that we have to think through. We're really serious about, and these terms, self and collective care, are spoken about quite widely, which I think is brilliant, and we absolutely need to be promoting those issues within our sector. I think for Lusungu and I, I would say we're quite self-aware, and I think we've reached a point where we've dropped a lot of the shame associated with experiencing stress and experiencing vicarious trauma. And as I said earlier, we've got that safe space between the two of us. So we do actually tend to recognize, oh, hold on, I'm experiencing something here. I need to take 10 minutes out. Or Lusungu, I need to step away for a minute. Can you kind of support me in this? So that, I think, is really integral to our work and what we do. And we're really serious about that. Another point I would say is this work is it takes a long time. We've had some cases that it's been like 8 months, 9 months. And quite frequently in our role, because of our position within the kind of the socio-ecology, we are able to negotiate a bit more closely or leverage our position or power, I suppose, to negotiate on behalf of survivors if they've asked us to do so. And we've had cases that have, as I say, lasted 8 months, 9 months in those kind of back and forth negotiations. And it's a lot of kind of emotional lifting as well. But I would say that I really do, and I think I can speak for Lusu as well, I think we do enjoy this work. I think we live out the principles of feminism, and that does include joy and love and and beauty. And I think we try to, the survivors that we engage with and our partners and ourselves, we see ourselves as kind of full, whole people. We're not reduced to these experiences that have brought us together. And we have had moments of joy with the survivors that we've worked with and with our partners. In one case, we'd been negotiating on behalf of a survivor who the INGO involved had said, we'll pay for your medical expenses in relation to the abuse that you experienced, but that's all we can offer you. And we were able to negotiate and say, actually, she needs further support. They had tried to say she should go to the courts in Malawi to get a child maintenance order, for example. And we were able to say, actually, that's not proportionate in Malawi, that wouldn't be enforceable given the structural challenges that the courts face in enforcing child maintenance. we feel that you should offer a support that would enable her to become financially independent. And they did offer that. And, it's moments like that where you really feel like we're making a difference for this individual and also influencing kind of best practice and how we can, just as a sector, be better for survivors of SEA. So we do get a lot of fulfillment out of that, and we do, derive a lot of joy from our work.
What is it about women's rights organizations that position them ideally for us to support victims and survivors? I know we talked about power and the power they hold in their current situation, but what is it about the existence that really enables the support coming through when these types of unfortunate incidents are happening?
I think, first of all, is where they are positioned. Because, and also, I think it's important to differentiate between the different levels of WROs. You've got international level, that's WROs, then you've got national level WROs, then you've got district level, for example, in Malawi, and then you've got community-based who are right there in the communities. I believe that aspect of positionality, as Amanda was talking about accessibility, imagine the possibility or probability of a regular community member calling Amanda and I where we are sitting and having access to us, or having access to an office of an INTO, for example, than a community-based organization that is right in their community. And when we look at the socio-ecological model, in the socio-ecology, we know that survivors, when violence happens, their first point of call is family, neighbors. Family, it can be family, neighbors, or friends. The second layer of the point of call for support is traditional informal structures. So it might be chiefs, religious leaders, and I think WROs also fall around that informal structure, because many of them, as I mentioned, are formed organically. But this is what the evidence shows us, right? That then it's going to be the informal sector. Only depending on how a survivor has been treated in that informal setting when they report, do they decide to enter the formal structures of reporting to different structures like, for example, the police, etc., and then other bigger structures. So WROs, in terms of their positionality, that is one thing that enables them to be the best in terms of supporting survivors. Number two, many WROs operate on principles of feminism. They might not use the word feminist, but they are feminist as in the adjective. So they will have principles of, we want to support the survivor. We've had some of the WROs that we support, for example, before they had our financial support. If a survivor goes to them, what would they do if a survivor needs temporary shelter? They're going to report to the chief that I'm taking in this survivor and keep them in their own house, right? And keep them in their own house and use their own personal resources to take care of this survivor. And this has happened since time immemorial, that women's groups have come together to support other women that are in need and to support other vulnerable groups of people that are in need. Mm-hmm. So that aspect of being feminist in the way that they operate also places them, because they operate from a point of accountability, a point of compassion, and a point of knowing that they have to go beyond the extra mile. They do not treat this work as an 8 to 5, although I think that should be balanced up, that we do not take advantage of the fact that they have gone on since time immemorial to provide that support and have that burden. Because right now, if you talk to WROs, that even the ones that we work with, when we first started the conversation of self and collective care, they were like, what is that? Of course, I'll pick up the phone at 1 a.m. if a survivor calls. Of course, I'll pick up a phone anytime. How do you rest? Oh, I go and accompany a survivor somewhere, or I do this. So that concept as well, because they see how the work is, they have now come together and defined their own self-care. It might not be therapy, it might be music, it might be coming together to share food. While they're doing the work, it might be composing songs about prevention of violence while they're doing the work. So those are some of the special things that really position WROs to provide the support that is needed to survivors of SIA and survivors of violence. And then when we come in, we try to be as careful as possible not to disrupt this. Oh, we are here to formalize. Why are we formalizing the process that continues to work? Why don't we ask them, what are the gaps that are there, and how can we support you to continue to do this work and unburden you a little bit in our equitable partnerships and collaboration?
So what do they tell you? What do they tell you about how to enable them in this process?
So, for example, we for the program that we are on, we actually, Amanda and I actually worked to vouch for having organizational development budget to make sure that we are not just saying for this project and then we'll leave you how we are. So, doing a proper, not doing like due diligence, no, but asking them, what are your gaps? Assess yourself as an organization, what are your gaps? Some of the things that have come up, for example, is that, okay, you are giving us resources, we would like to have the ability to be able to have a proper financial system to make sure that we are delivering well and we are able to, sustain ourselves as we go. Some have been survivor-centered approaches. WRLs have been doing this since time immemorial, as I've said, but it does take time to go through the gender transformative process, even individually. So you'll find that, for example, one day they will support a survivor and they will say, because that is all they know, right? They will do everything for this survivor. And then they'll say, when you go home, don't be rude to your husband. Or when this happens, please just avoid. And that's the tough love that they know. They do not know that is victim blaming, that is not being survivor centered. So that kind of support they have asked us to provide. Support to document the work that they are doing. We have provided that kind of support. How do you document? How do you document digitally if you want to do it? Issues of data protection, they have asked for that support. We need that support. Issues of, okay, we need to also be held accountable, not just between us, but maybe registering and having a board can help us to be accountable and can also help us to go after other funding. Can you help us? How does this go? Influencing at the national level, help us. How do we do it? And we have provided that kind of support. And you'll be surprised that sometimes it might not seem like it's directly related to providing support to survivors, for example, but it is in the long run. It is because we want them to continue going, right? And we want to make sure that they have the right support that they need to continue to go so that they do not burn out in the work.
I might add as well, if I may, Guni, I think one thing we've seen, particularly with cases of SIA, is that partnership with us offers, I hope, a level of protection. So when we started working with the women's group in Dzaleka refugee camp, for example, in our first initial conversations, we had quite an extensive period of just talking to each other and getting to know each other and understanding what we can offer each other. And they say to us, we hear about these cases all the time. We know these cases are happening. And when people reach out for support, all we really can offer is solidarity. And I don't mean to say all, because that's a lot, but, support and care and concern. But we don't feel able to engage with the agency or, do anything to hold the perpetrator accountable, because I'm at risk. I'm also on the beneficiary list for this, and I'm also hoping to be relocated. So I don't feel able to stand up and say, oh, hold on, we've got to report this. So through those conversations, we shared experiences where we had, as we've spoken previously, stepped in and done that on behalf of the survivor and behalf of the WRO. And the room lifted. I think they were like, oh. And now in our partnership, we've done that. We have had cases where they've said to us, we can't be publicly seen to be kind of standing up for this person. And we've said, okay, well, then we will. And it just enables that kind of, it reduces their risk. It offers some level of protection, enables that accountability process to function a bit more effectively, I think.
Maybe to end on a personal note, I'd love to hear more about both of you. Why is this work on the prevention and response to sexual misconduct by aid workers so important to you personally? What drives you to keep pushing forward in this space, which, as we mentioned, can be quite heavy and hard?
I don't remember a time when I was not a feminist. So even as a kid, I think I had a very strong sense of social justice and anger, a lot of anger and questions about how the world was set up, about as a little girl, about some of the things that were expected of me and not expected of, for example, my brother, for example, male friends So until I encountered feminism later on in my late teens and then early 20s. So I'm very much driven by the idea of freedom. Freedom from violence for women and girls and from gender diverse people. Freedom for all of us. One of my favorite, she sang, but she was also an activist and Black American, Nina Simone, says, what does freedom mean to you? And she says, it means no fear. And I get the sense that feminism is the only movement in the world that gives us that opportunity, that viewpoint that we can live in a world with no fear, a world free of violence, right? And we now have a lot of evidence that shows that violence is preventable. So I'm driven by that. I want to be part of that violence is preventable. How do we work together to make sure that we achieve a world, we build a world where women and girls and gender diverse people are free from all forms of violence. So that is what drives me every day. And that is what drives the work that I do. And lastly, one of my feminist elders, Audre Lorde, I think she said in her book called Sister Outsider, that is a compilation of essays, she said, I'm not free until all women are free, although their shackles might look different from mine. That for me is also such a motivation. And I think every time I think of quitting, every time it gets hard, I'm just like, I might think I am free, but if any other woman is not free, I'm not completely free. So we'll continue to work and do this work. So yeah, that is what drives me. And I feel like it's an honor for me to be in this space and work with my feminist community to continue to do this work, working towards our freedom. I do not want gender equality. I want freedom, complete freedom, and to live free of fear and violence.
I think for me, similarly to Lusungu, I definitely identify as feminist. I think I have a strong sense of what I view as right and wrong. And I think the privilege of working alongside people like Lusungu and in this space to just be tenacious and just keep pushing if we're asked to and just keep disrupting and keep driving. I find it very fulfilling, I suppose. I was sat in a meeting with a survivor yesterday, and even though the topic of the conversation was obviously really distressing, I felt like this is where I'm supposed to be. This is the work I'm supposed to be doing. I think this is important, and it's important for the people that are around me, and it's important for me. And like everything Lucy's just so beautifully said, I think that we can strive for better, and I think together we can strive for better. And having the absolute privilege of working alongside Lusu and others is just pushes me to keep going.
And the feeling is mutual, by the way, with working with Mandy as well.
It's so nice to witness friendship, sisterhood, partnership in this conversation. Thank you so much, Lusungu and Amanda, for joining me today, and for the incredible work and service that you are doing to support survivors and victims rights organization. I hope our conversation inspires our listeners as much as I am right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guni. This has been lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or questions, feel free to reach out to us to prseah@who.int. Until the next time, goodbye.